The three of us have gotten together, Peter Gamba, Llewellyn, Lafford, and Jack Ossont, and we got together because a group called the Committee to Preserve the Finger Lakes. And that group was formed about 3 years ago by a group of retired professionals and from various walks of life, engineers, teachers, lawyers, accountants, and whatnot, to look at this Marcellus shale drilling in the Finger Lakes. And our goal was to kind of look at the economic issues as well as the environmental issues. And as we began to look at it, we discovered that the economics weren't, the environmental issues really overpowered the economic issues and the benefits. So we started looking at it more and more, and the group we had forums. We had forums with the Attorney General's office on leases. We had forums with farm forums to talk about farmers and the farming challenges. We had forums with environmental people to educate the community. So our mission was primarily to do education, and as a result of that group getting formed, Jack got involved with us, and Llewellyn got involved with us. So we're all three of us, along with the other crew, a team of people, are working together to essentially educate the people in the Finger Lakes and New York, but Finger Lakes first, in order to prevent this destructive heavy industry from coming here. And we've all worked at various levels and we've all taken our experience from our past lives in business and and brought it here. My background is engineering, and Llewellyn's background is
engineering,
and Jack's background
engineering.
So, oh my gosh, a whole bunch of engineers. And so we've kind of looked at this and we've gotten involved. And right now our focus is to ensure that the local towns have the authority and the right to say that this is a dangerous thing to do, and they can vote against it. And so that's my story.
Actually, I should preface my remarks by saying I'm not an engineer. I was involved in housing development, so there was some engineering involved. But I came and got involved in the Committee to Preserve the Finger Lakes on the basis of my involvement with another group called the Coalition to Protect New York, and more recently Frack Busters New York, which has a different take in terms of where we feel New York has to go if we're going to say no to this industry. But we also see the passage of local laws as being extremely important. All three of us do. And right now there's about 77 towns that have moved either to ban or are in the process of moving towards banning this practice within their geographical area on the basis of, and two decisions that were just recently rendered by Supreme Court level of our legal system in New York, in Middlefield and Dryden, wherein the judges upheld the fractivist position that localities do have the right to ban out heavy industrial use, and said that to the state that does not constitute regulating the industry. It is the right of a town to determine how their land mass is going to be utilized. And with a technology like fracking being as dangerous as it is in not only the eyes of fractivists, but in the eyes of scientists all around the world, the judges were saying that towns actually should have this authority. So that's where we are now, and we're building that kind of, as I like to describe it, a tsunami of towns that have taken that position, that become a large enough political force to actually confront and push back against the current leadership in the state.
I moved to Penn about 4 years ago from New York City, where I lived for 35 years. I happen to have been born in Geneva, a few miles away from here, but I left the Finger Lakes right after college and went to New York to seek fame and fortune, and knocked around doing lots of different things. In the mid-'80s, became a software engineer, did that for about 25 years. Then about 2007, decided that I was sort of sick of being a cog and I wanted to do something different with my life, and my wife felt the same way. We decided, let's all get together and open a bed and breakfast. We sold our house in Brooklyn and looked around for another house, a Victorian, that we could open as a bed and breakfast in a beautiful part of the country. There were 3 basic requirements, very simple. It had to be an affordable house, it had to be a beautiful Victorian that was amenable to being a bed and breakfast, and it had to be in a location that would attract tourists. One of the places we looked was here in the Finger Lakes as part of our due diligence, and we found a gorgeous house on Main Street in Penn, New York. We took our first paying customer last May of 2011, so we haven't even been open a full year yet. We couldn't have been happier because what we found here in Penn, in the Finger Lakes, was an absolutely beautiful environment, wonderful people, a countryside, and an industry, the tourism and wine industry, that attracted a constant stream of tourists that should keep a bed and breakfast, full and happy for many years to come. So we were really patting ourselves on the back at our choice until we found out about hydrofracking.
And what meeting was that you found out?
About a year ago, I went to a screening of Gasland, sponsored by this organization called the Committee to Preserve the Finger Lakes. It was eye-opening, the whole issue of hydrofracking, and that the Finger Lakes had a huge target drawn on it. The gas industry couldn't wait to drill down into the Marcellus layer and then blast out horizontally and shoot down millions of pounds of pressure of water and sand and secret chemicals, many of which are known carcinogens, and potentially destroy the tourism industry and my livelihood. The very, very, very scary part about it is what it can do to this world, this beautiful world that has been given to us. Everything here was so wonderful and so beautiful. We said, this is, such a beautiful life. Aha! The name of our bed and breakfast, La Belle Vie. That's what it's all about, was our life here, La Belle Vie, the beautiful life. And then we found out that potentially it was going to be destroyed, not just the tourism industry. Imagine a headline in the New York Times saying, catastrophic spill from hydrofracking accident in the Finger Lakes. Bang, all of your reservations would go away, people would stop coming, they'd be scared. It would only take 1 or 2 of those to really, really destroy the tourism industry, which is also the wine industry, which is also the agriculture industry. The biggest industries here in the Finger Lakes are agriculture and tourism, by far. And they're both extremely vulnerable to
and just to add a couple things here, you mentioned the occurrence that could occur in the Finger Lakes. Well, down in Pennsylvania, Tony Ingraffia often speaks of this, who is a expert in the development of hydrofracking. In fact, did some of the original hydrofracking work with Schlumberger and others in the oil and gas industry. And he says that in every 150 wells that are drilled, there's a major environmental accident. So if you do the math on the estimated 100,000 wells that they forecast for drilling in New York State and in Pennsylvania, there's going to be thousands of major environmental problems that are caused. So, yeah, we don't want to see that here.
And Jack was talking about the environmental issue. I got involved in studying the environment after I retired. I went to a community college up here and took music and environment just to kind of keep myself busy for a while. And the environmental classes there were very, very eye-opening. We went to Costa Rica. It was one of our classes, and we looked what they were doing down there, where they had come from really pretty much a destructive economy from an environmental perspective to an economy that really protected the environment. You can really see the difference. And became aware of the environmental issues. And as I looked at hydrofracking, And the gas drilling part, it just seemed to me that it was going to really undermine our whole community and society and environment, not for me, but for years to come. And I see this Marcellus shale, this hydrofracking industry challenge that is being challenged right now in New York State as a tipping point for the environmental industry, for the who want to really look at renewables and sustainable cultures and sustainable energy. It's going to hopefully force us, encourage us to kind of look at sustainability and renewables, and I think that's going to happen in New York. I also look at the total of New York. I grew up where Llewellyn worked for years. I left there 20 years ago, and I've lived in rural areas for the past 45, 46 years. So now you know how old I am.
You grew up in Brooklyn.
I grew up in Queens.
Oh, Queens. No.
Queens. You got to be careful. I mean, Queens and Brooklyn.
No.
Like this. I went to school in Brooklyn.
Oh.
Anyway, when we were down in the New York area, in the metropolitan area, in the urban area, the point I was trying to make is that we took all our energy for granted. I mean, we took our water for granted. We took our electricity for granted. We took the gas we used to heat our homes and cook for granted. We never asked the question of where it came from. We took it for granted.
Not only that, the electricity never failed.
Never failed.
There were no outages, lightning strikes and all that didn't matter. It was a constant, totally regulated electrical power.
Yeah, it reminds me of you city guys, because we used to do sewage sludge research, and we'd ask people down in the city, where does your waste go when you flush the toilet? None of them knew, It was,
well,
I knew.
I knew when I was a kid. We used to go down to. I lived near LaGuardia Airport, which is on the Flushing Bay there, right, Flushing Bay, and we used to go there when we were kids, and the sewage that you talked about went right into the bay.
Yeah.
And it wasn't,
hence the name Flushing Bay?
Could be. And, no, Flushing is an old town name. But it was in the middle 50s that people said, oh my gosh, we can't do this anymore. And that's when they started to clean it up. But I remember when we were kids, we used to go and the stuff used to come right out.
I didn't mean to take a siding to sewage here, but I think when you were talking about renewables, that's the same kind of situation we addressed. From energy, we were addressing in waste disposal, and I think that the two are linked, because what has happened is cities traditionally take a low-cost or least-cost approach to a whole range of issues, including energy production, and hence you've got Michael Bloomberg contributing $50 million to the Sierra Club just a little while ago. I think the expectation on this contribution was that the Sierra Club will continue to go beyond coal and support gas as a bridge fuel, which I think we need to remind the audience here that gas is not the bridge fuel, because if we go in that direction, the research on renewables that you're suggesting, and I'm strongly in concurrence with, will be retarded, if not delayed to a point where we won't be able to address our energy issues.
In the whole process of looking at renewables and all this other stuff, I go back to my education, my engineering education, high school to graduate school. And in that whole time frame, we talked about how to build things, we talked how to create things, we were taught to be real creative and everything else. But we never asked ourselves the question, from an ethical standpoint or an environmental standpoint, what is the impact of what we were doing? When I was in high school, I went to an engineering high school, and we studied engineering. And there was one book I remember called Where Things Are Made, or How Things Are Made, and it's taught us where coal came from, where gas came from, how steel was made, how aluminum was made, and all this other stuff. And it was just really fascinating, but no one ever really addressed the question: what were the impacts of this from an environmental standpoint? And when I was in graduate school and stuff, we talked about industrial engineering. No one ever even brought up the ethics of what we were doing.
Do you think that's changed? Do you think that gas companies today think about the ethical consequences of their
my observation is no. But when you go back to the educational institutions, I don't know if they're doing it. And I was just addressing from an educational standpoint. The industry doesn't seem to be very well orchestrated from an ethical or environmental standpoint. I mean, they're not asking themselves the questions, and I think if they were to start asking the questions, what are we doing? How does it affect society? What's the good things we can do for society at some level? Things might change, but they're not really addressing that. It's really clear from their behavior. You know, if they talk about it in a bar, that's one thing, but their behavior is totally different. So I'm involved in this because I see this as a time in our culture where we need to turn around. We need to kind of figure out how to be sustainable, how to be renewable. And I think it's a tipping point. And I think New York is the Empire State. And that name comes from, depending who you read, comes from George Washington through the ages. I mean, we have that name and we have that reputation. We have great agriculture. We have great financial institutions. We have great educational institutions. We don't need to succumb to get polluted by becoming a state that supports fossil fuel development. We need to kind of figure out how to use less fossil fuel, and we have the resources and the skills and everything else in New York to do it. And I'm really an advocate of and I've told the governor a number of times that he's got to become less of a city kid and become more of a rural person and use the Empire State's resources, the skills and the resources and the agriculture and stuff like that to continue making us an Empire State. If the gas industry comes in here to the extent that they want to, we will be no longer the Empire State. We will be some other name that won't be so nice.
The gas production capital of the Northeast.
Whatever.
Or
yeah,
storage.
So that I see. I'm looking at it from a whole New York perspective.
Subsidiary of Texas or Oklahoma.
Yeah, we are not Texas. We are not Oklahoma. Pennsylvania, they discovered oil, and that's great. And we've been using it. I mean, I drove 20 miles here to come here to do this this afternoon. And I mean, I use gas.
It was a solar car, right?
No, it's not. It's a gas car, gasoline. I mean, I use all the resources that are being made, but I'm willing, and I'm in the process of trying to minimize that, and I think everybody needs to.
Yeah. One of the interesting points that I've heard recently is that's kind of exciting is that, you know, they talk about gas as a bridge fuel to the future when, you know, renewables, solar, wind, geothermal, etc., become economically feasible. Well, first of all, it would be kind of crazy to spend all of the money on the infrastructure necessary to do the gas extraction and processing. That would only be good for 20 years because that's what the projection is. 20 years, and then we'll be able to do the solar stuff. But the fact is, we have actually reached at this point a sort of tipping point where the renewables are economically feasible. And gas, for instance, the price of natural gas has dropped so much that it's not going to make enough money for the gas companies for what they're putting into it, which is why they're going to sell it to the highest bidder in the world, which won't be the United States. But we are at the point where if we took all of this money that people want to invest in natural gas and shale drilling and switched it over to investing it in the renewable development, which we are at the tipping point of being economically feasible, we'd be there now.
You know, Deborah Rogers, who's actually coming into Yates County on the 24th of March, talks about the capitalization of this industry and the fact that in her evaluating the financial reports that the industry has rendered to the feds, that they have to drill 10 wells to get one productive well. So when
That's a lousy return.
When they don't continue to drill at that kind of ratio, and especially now, given the fact that gas prices are so depressed, it puts them, like Chesapeake is today, near bankruptcy. Chesapeake has to come up with a couple $2 billion to pay off their notes, on the interest on their notes in the foreseeable future. So there's a question now of whether you capitalize the renewables, which all three of us are in favor of, or whether you continue to capitalize these fossil fuels, which are dry well driven to a certain extent. And she'll expound on this. It all goes back to a 2008 SEC Security and Exchange Commission ruling during the end of the Bush administration that allowed these gas companies to project from their wells that they were drilling in a specific geographic area, the production from those areas onto all of this other area that they'd leased, where there was no way of accurately projecting what the production was going to be there. Effectively, what that did was to reduce their cost to the potential investors in their stock. When you distribute the cost in this area on average across a larger geographic area of holding, then it reduced their cost of doing business, and that was attractive to investors, and that's where they got a lot of money flooding into their stocks. But now, when this evidence has come out that they have to drill 10 for one that's really producing, the capital investment is starting to diminish, and it's putting them in a very difficult financial position, which is also driving the wanting to come into the more profitable area of the southern tier of New York State. But the big question is, do we want to allow them to come in and take our resources out at a depressed rate of, it's about $2.50 a thousand cubic feet, or do we want to have that reserved for the future if in fact it ever becomes safe, which we don't think it currently is, and mimic the people in Ontario or Quebec, where they put in a 20-year moratorium, saying that that gas isn't going to go anywhere, it's going to remain there, and in 20 years maybe we'll find the capitalization opportunities into renewables, and maybe we'll decide never to drill and take that out, since we haven't found a safe way to extract it. So I mean,
the gas will still be there in 20 years if it turns out we really do need it. There's no need to rush into trying to drill it now with questionable technology
and questionable financial returns.
Yeah. Where necessary.
That I think about is when we're watching PBS and brought to you by the natural gas for the underwriters,
right,
for public television, which makes it seem so wonderful and clean and pure because this is PBS.
Yeah, it gets into how much they've expended. They've expended $757 million in the last 10 years to promote this.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I could talk about that.
It just makes it seem so.
Well, let me start. We've gotten involved locally. We didn't talk too much about the local stuff we're doing as far as local laws are concerned. And when we got involved trying to do this local law at the different towns, a lot of people said, well, you got to have a balanced presentation. You got to bring people from both sides of the issue in there. You got to have the people that challenge it. You got to have the people that are in favor of it, gas companies. And one of the things that I've said is that they say you just bring in the people that are challenging it, and I said, look at the Times. The New York Times had full-page ads 8 or 9 months ago from the gas companies. The New Yorker magazine. Now these are all progressive magazines, but New Yorker magazine had up until December had 2 full-page ads in their weekly thing from the gas company. The Atlantic magazine, again, which is considered a progressive liberal magazine at some level, had full-page ads. The point I'm trying to make is that I don't watch TV, but people I know who watch TV say there are ads on there over and over and over again. So when someone came up to me and they said, well, you're having a forum and you don't have somebody from the gas company there, I said, the people from the gas company they're alive and well and they're in the media. And they said, this is the group so we're coming to kind of say, oh, by the way, here's the other side of the story. So when you were talking about the industry and all this other stuff, they're alive and well, and a lot of people say, in order to challenge people who want to kind of look at this from an environmental standpoint, when we try and challenge that, they say we're not balanced, but we're unbalanced, and we're unbalanced to the degree that we don't have the funds or the resources that the gas companies have to kind of advertise.
Yeah, I think Steve Kaufman, in response to this, which came up as a discussion at the Committee to Preserve the Finger Lakes, came up with a long essay that was published in the paper, which noted the fact that something like $757 million has been spent in the last 10, 15 years by the industry to convince people that this is not only doable, but is the patriotic thing to do, that gas is going to keep our culture, our expectations of having the American dream alive.
And solve our energy crisis.
And give us 100 years of energy, when in fact, when all of these studies that have been recently done show that the gas companies had sold the American public a bill of goods, and that in fact we don't have 100 years of gas available. It's just like that projection of the SEC allowed the gas companies to do on a dream that there was going to be that much gas available, and they've reduced the estimates now by 66% in the case of one study and 80% in the case of another study. USGS was the 80%, and I'm not bringing up the 66%. I think it was Chesapeake's own study had reduced their estimates. So we've got how would you describe something like a snake oil kind of situation here, a snake oil salesman situation, right? The gas company goes out. The most recent ad I saw was 1 million jobs are going to be created by the gas company in the United States. Well, every economic study I've seen says that you're going to see in the tens of thousands of jobs and nowhere near 1 million jobs in this industry. So I think that balance is where you find it, and you don't find it on television ads. We can't afford to put ads on television. You don't find balance on radio ads. You don't find balance in newspapers. The only place you find balance is in the community, where 90% of the people that are going to be affected reside, and they hold meetings and express their discontent with this whole sham that's being perpetrated by the gas companies upon us.
And when you talk about New York, and they talk about the increase in jobs in New York, and if you come to the Finger Lakes region, you might increase the jobs for the gas industry, but you're going to significantly decrease the jobs for the agriculture, the tourism, and the wine industry. Yeah. I mean, so the net effect is going to be less. I mean, that's clear. In this little town called Penn, there's a there's a cement company here who's losing drivers to Pennsylvania. I heard this just the other day.
Hanson.
Yeah, right. And I talked to a neighbor of mine who had some leases last night, and he told me about when he put the lease on his property about 4 or 5 years ago. They tell them it's just going to be a simple vertical well. We'll just be here a couple of days, no big deal. He says they didn't tell him anything about this heavy industry stuff. So it's really interesting. I guess the way I look at the gas industry, it's been around for 150 years. Started in, not the gas industry, the fossil fuel industry, and we kind of take it for granted. And in the places that got devastated, we never kind of got wind of it. I was into West Virginia maybe 35 years ago, visiting some friends of my wife who lived down there. This fellow taught college, but when we were down there, we were in a mining town, and it was just, I mean, back then I didn't give it a second thought, but I couldn't wait to leave. I said, well, this is the town. It was dirty. It was, it was just really a place I just didn't want to live in. But again, I could leave. I don't want that to happen to me.
Well, and that's the irony too here, is that a lot of the environmental community at the national level has been working against dirty coal. The Beyond Coal campaign, the Sierra Club is a good example of that. And initially they got lots of money from Chesapeake, $26 million, and they also got lots of money from other investors, like the Bloomberg $50 million recently. I think the New York City wants to ensure that continued gas is going to flow in by these large pipelines that they're building down there. The point being is that you've got a lot of the national environmental groups pushing this, but people down at the grassroots level that are having to see the consequences of living with this, because they've been to Pennsylvania, they've been to West Virginia, they've been to other states that are experiencing this, they see that in a much different way down at the ground level, and are demanding that these national and state level groups that may be still pushing gas get real and get more oriented towards a grassroots approach to this issue. And I think that that's another component that we really need to be concerned about, and to push an awareness upon the leaderships of those groups. It was a pleasure seeing you again.
Good to see you again. Pleasure's all mine.
Great.
Okay.